The British government has asked the Chinese officials to waive their diplomatic immunity. Chinese retail sales plunged to 5.9% in November as COVID wreaks havoc. China tightens regulations of online comments. China claims the U.S. created the Indo-Pacific concept to bring in India, while China increases hostility towards its neighbor. And more coming up on today's episode of China Explained. You might remember that on the 16th of October, the Chinese Consul General Zhang Xiwan and a few of his goons dragged some protesters inside the consulate who were professing their dissatisfaction about the treatment of Hong Kong and assaulted them for exercising their rights and freedoms. Now the UK has asked these 6 diplomats to give up their official immunity so they could be investigated by the police. Instead, China decided to repatriate these officials, including the Consul General Xiwan. Although he has denied that he beat the protester up, despite the security camera proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that he played a part in the violence against the protesters, he does not deny his involvement in the incident. In a statement, the ambassador of China to the UK said, "It was a violent, disruptive provocation deliberately staged by anti-China elements who assaulted our consulate members and illegally intruded into the consulate premises, gravely undermining the safety and dignity of consulate officials. It was of a most malignant nature," and went on to say that the Consul General coming back was a normal rotation of Chinese consular officers. In response, Foreign Secretary James Cleverly said in a written statement, "I am disappointed that these individuals will not be interviewed or face justice. Nonetheless, it is right that those responsible for the disgraceful scenes in Manchester are no longer, or will shortly cease to be, consular staff accredited to the UK." The incident comes at a time of growing tensions between the two countries as the British government hardens its policies toward Beijing, while still trying to engage with the CCP against the backdrop of China cracking down on pro-democracy protesters in Hong Kong. Furthermore, the UK has offered visas to tens of thousands of residents of Hong Kong, which aggravated Beijing even more. MP Alicia Kearns, chairman of Parliament's Watchdog Foreign Affairs Committee, welcomed the development, saying the 6 have fled the UK like cowards, making clear their guilt, and went on to add, "The Foreign Office must now declare those who have fled persona non grata and make clear that they are never again welcome in the UK." In a speech last month, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said that the golden era of relations between the UK and China is over, and identified it as a systematic challenge to our values and interests. However, he stopped short of describing China as a threat and then chickened out and said that Western countries should work with China on shared challenges such as climate change and the health of the global economy. At this time, I would like to remind you, the viewer, that the lion's share of the world's greenhouse gases, responsible for climate change, is emitted by China. Although I do understand why Mr. Sunak wouldn't directly come out and claim China as its enemy. The diplomatic move seemed to align with that carefully calibrated policy of resolving the incident in Manchester without formally expelling the Chinese diplomats from Britain. In response, China has removed diplomats from the British consulate, including the Consul General himself. In a statement issued on Wednesday by the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, an international group of legislators, Mr. Chan said that, while it may have taken 2 months for this to happen, I believe that this is one way of solving this complicated diplomatic problem. He went on to add, "I relocated to this country with my family to live freely. What happened on 16 October 2022 was unacceptable and illegal, and the withdrawal of these Chinese diplomats gives me a sense of closure." This move was still not enough to satisfy some of the most vocal critics of China in the British Parliament, including Ian Duncan Smith, a senior Conservative Party lawmaker. He has been sanctioned by China for spreading what it said were lies and disinformation about the human rights abuses against ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. In other news, last week, China loosened restrictions for mass testing and quarantine after nearly 3 years of desperately trying to squash the virus. Promptly after the news of the relaxation of regulations, the officially reported infections plummeted from a record high last month. With testing no longer mandated by the CCP, China's National Health Commission admitted that the numbers no longer reflected the reality. The NHC said in a statement, "Many asymptomatic people are no longer participating in nucleic acid testing, so it is impossible to accurately grasp the actual number of asymptomatic infected people." The statement comes after Vice Premier Sun Chunlan said the capital's new infections were rapidly growing, according to a state media readout. As the country steers its tricky path out of the zero-COVID policy, it's met with another challenge, which this time pertains to its already crumbling economy. China's retail sales have plunged. As COVID restrictions are lifted, China is brought to terms that it can no longer rely on mass testing and forced quarantine camps to earn a significant chunk of its revenue, which might, I remind you, were paid by its citizens, were a significant part of China's revenue for the past 3 years. And who can forget the Evergrande crisis? The world's second-largest economy is in quite a difficult position. The figures show that as it moves away from stringent COVID regulations, the work ahead for CCP would be to reinvigorate the slumping economy. Retail sales have taken a hit of 5.9% from the previous year, which makes it the second consecutive year the economy has shrunk, according to data released by the National Bureau of Statistics. The data also showed industrial production grew by 2.2% less than half of October's rate, while unemployment rose to 5.6%, an increase of 0.1%. Although these data are published by the CCP, so I would take this information with a grain of salt. While the move away from zero COVID lays the groundwork for an eventual recovery in activity down the line, the transition period will prove quite disruptive. Julian Evans Pritchard and Shi-Chun Huang of Capital Economics said in a note on Thursday, The Economist predicted a slump in economic performance in December and warned of declined activity as many people and households try to reduce in-person contact to avoid the wave of infections as China reopens. The Chinese leaders have set an annual growth target of about 5.5%, but many experts and observers think they'll struggle to hit anything better than 3.9%. What do you think the CCP is doing in these trying times for the country and its citizens? If you guessed the tightening of online comments, you would be correct. Beijing began applying new rules governing online comments today, further threatening freedom of expression in a move authorities said was aimed at protecting national security. The cyberspace authorities drew up an even stricter set of regulations on the moderation of online comments, and they took effect on Thursday. Now service providers will carry out a credit evaluation of users based on their commenting behavior, and people who have been seriously discredited by their messages will be put on a blacklist, which will prohibit users from commenting further, even with a new account. This is China's way of saying you got away with a protest once, but now even thinking of protesting will get you in hot water. Although these rules apply to only the comment sections of websites and apps, they can and will be using it for mass surveillance. Plus, the rules don't just end there. All users have to register with their real names and ID card number, I guess so they could enter the homes of its citizens and beat them up, as they did to some of the protesters. The Cyberspace Administration said they would help protect national security, the public interest, and citizens. The state media praised the changes, saying the internet is not a lawless zone, but netizens expressed only tepid support or objections. While China is having problems inside its borders, it is simultaneously creating problems outside its territory. To bring you up to speed, China recently attacked Indian troops in the state of Arunachal Pradesh, where troops engaged in hand-to-hand combat as no weapons are allowed within 2 kilometers, around 1 mile, of the line of actual control, which is the border between India and China. And soldiers from both sides were injured, but there were no casualties, to which the White House said the Biden administration is glad both India and China quickly disengaged after clashing in Arunachal Pradesh's Tawang sector, but also added that they will be closely monitoring this situation. This was enough for the Chinese ambassador to France, Liu She, to lose his cool, who said in an interaction with a French journalist, there is no such concept as the Indo-Pacific, and claimed that this was something that the US created to bring partners such as India to contain China. This reflects Beijing's hardening opposition to both the Indo-Pacific strategy as well as the regional grouping, such as the Quad. He added, it is a concept created by the US. He added, in the past, we used to talk about the Pacific or the Asia-Pacific region, never about the Indo-Pacific. Why did the Americans include the Indian Ocean? Is it because they believed their Asian-Pacific allies alone are no longer enough to contain China? They want to bring in India and other U.S. allies, such as France, which considers itself an Indo-Pacific country? This is wrong. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who initially dismissed the idea of Quad as a transient idea as the sea foam, also struck a harder tone earlier this year when he equated it to the Five Eyes, which is an intelligence alliance involving Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the US, and the UK, also known as AUKUS. He went on to say that it was by no means a blessing, and the real goal is to establish an Indo-Pacific NATO. India has strongly pushed back against China's invoking of NATO as a comparison, and pointed to the fact that India is not a US ally, and the Quad was not a military alliance. Indian officials have also rejected China's argument that the US was stoking recent tensions in India-China relations, which New Delhi attributes to Beijing's aggressive posture along the line of actual control. Most Chinese strategic experts, in contrast, attribute the downturn concerning India's increasingly close ties with the US. In retaliation to the incident and China's salami-slicing policy, India, the Air Force bolstered by its full complement of Rafale combat jets, and launched a major exercise covering the Northeast region. However, it claimed that this drill was planned and was not a reaction to the recent flare-up. The two-day exercise involved almost all of its frontline fighter jets and other assets deployed to the region. An Indian parliamentary panel also called for an urgent revamp of the entire provisioning and procurement process for high-altitude army deployments. In the intervening period, China had altered a decades-old understanding between Washington and Beijing on dealing with issues related to the status of Taiwan and is now holding up a possibility of using force, United States Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said. He added that China has decided to exert more force on China, even if it means using force to achieve its goals. The U.S. recognized Beijing under its One China policy and also provided Taiwan with weapons for its defense. By doing so, it had helped to ensure that there will not be a conflict between the U.S. and China over Taiwan. What changed this decision is the government in Beijing said that the status quo was no longer acceptable, and that will speed up the reunification process by whichever was necessary, and that is what has fundamentally changed. Blinken's remarks follow Chinese President Xi Jinping securing a historic third term at last week's 5-yearly Congress of China's ruling Communist Party. They also come amid Beijing's statements that it would not renounce the right to use force to unite Taiwan with mainland China, though it would strive for a peaceful resolution. As tensions rise, Taiwanese private organizations are stepping forward to prepare Taiwanese citizens for war. According to Soochow University's Chen, demand from civilians for classes on war preparation has been rising, but until recently, there were few to choose from. Thank you for watching China Explained. If you liked this content, be sure to leave a like and share this amongst your friends. If you think you have any suggestions for us, leave them in the comments section below. And if you want more content like this, subscribe and ring the bell. Until next time, goodbye, and thank you for spending your time with us.